In 1889, one man spent what would be $45 million in today's money, building a castle in Victoria, British Columbia. 39 rooms, 4 stories, 17 fireplaces, imported stained glass worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Robert Dunsmuir never spent a single night in the mansion he built. He died before it was finished. And that was just the beginning of something much darker. Because what happened inside Craigdarroch Castle over the next 135 years turned it into Canada's most haunted mansion. We're talking about documented apparitions, invisible figures walking down staircases, the sound of children crying in empty rooms, and a family legacy so cursed that it destroyed one of the wealthiest dynasties in Canadian history. This isn't folklore. This isn't legend. These are documented accounts from security guards, tour guides, and thousands of visitors who've walked through those doors. And here's what no one's talking about. The real horror of Craigdarroch Castle isn't the ghosts. It's what created them in the first place. If you're ready to see what really happened inside Canada's most haunted mansion, let's begin. Let me show you how this story starts. Robert Dunsmuir arrived in Vancouver Island in 1851 with exactly nothing. Scottish immigrant, coal miner, working underground for wages that barely kept his family fed. But Dunsmuir wasn't like other miners. He understood something crucial about Vancouver Island that nobody else saw. The coal deposits there were some of the richest in North America. And in the 1850s, coal was everything. It powered steamships, it heated homes, it ran factories. Coal was the oil of the 19th century. By 1869, Dunsmuir had discovered a massive coal seam near Nanaimo. He convinced 4 San Francisco investors to back him, and he built his first mine. Within 5 years, the Wellington Colliery was producing 500 tons of coal per day. That's $2.5 million worth of coal annually in today's money, from a single mine. But here's where it gets interesting. Dunsmuir didn't just own the mine, he owned the miners. Company housing, company stores, company rules. If you worked for Dunsmuir, you lived in a Dunsmuir house, bought from Dunsmuir stores, and died in Dunsmuir mines. The profits weren't just substantial. They were obscene. By 1880, Robert Dunsmuir was worth approximately $15 million. That's $450 million in today's currency. He controlled 75% of Vancouver Island's coal production. He owned railways, he owned shipping lines, he owned real estate across British Columbia. The Dunsmuir Empire employed over 1,500 men and controlled an economic network that touched every aspect of life in the region. And here's the part nobody talks about. Those mines killed people. Constantly. The Wellington Colliery had one of the worst safety records in North America. Between 1879 and 1887, at least 150 miners died in Dunsmuir's pits. Cave-ins, gas explosions, equipment failures. The Dunsmuir mines were death traps, and everybody knew it. But Robert Dunsmuir kept getting richer, and in 1887, he decided to build something that would cement his legacy forever. A castle, not just a mansion, a genuine Scottish baronial castle transplanted to the hills of Victoria, British Columbia. Now let's look at what Dunsmuir actually built, because the numbers are staggering. Construction began in 1887 on a hill overlooking Victoria. The architect was Warren Haywood Williams from Portland, Oregon. The style was Scottish baronial revival, the same architecture used for Balmoral Castle in Scotland. 39 rooms, 25,000 square feet, 4 complete floors plus a tower. The foundation alone required 150 tons of granite quarried from Nelson Island and shipped to Victoria. The exterior walls were built with sandstone blocks, each one weighing between 200 and 400 pounds, transported by rail from Coxsila. But here's what makes Craigdarroch different from every other mansion of its era. Dunsmuir imported everything. The stained glass windows came from Chicago and cost $87,000, which is $2.6 million today. The woodwork was carved from oak, cedar, mahogany, and maple, with different wood types for different rooms. The grand staircase was constructed from solid oak with hand-carved newel posts, and it rose 87 steps from the ground floor to the tower. 17 fireplaces, each one different, each one featuring custom tilework imported from Europe. The drawing room fireplace alone cost $12,000 in 1887 dollars. That's $360,000 today for one fireplace. The total construction cost was approximately $1.5 million in 1887 currency. In today's money, that's $45 million for a private residence in Victoria, British Columbia in 1887. But here's the real problem. Robert Dunsmuir never saw it finished. On April 12, 1889, while Craigdarroch Castle was still under construction, Robert Dunsmuir died. He was 63 years old. The cause of death was listed as complications from an unspecified illness, though some historical accounts suggest it was heart failure brought on by stress. And that wasn't the real tragedy. The real tragedy was what he left behind. Joan Dunsmuir was 58 years old when her husband died. She had married Robert in Scotland in 1847, followed him to Vancouver Island, raised 10 children, and watched her husband build an empire. Now, she stood in an unfinished castle with a decision to make. Finish the castle, move in, maintain the legacy. That's what Joan decided. And in 1890, Craigdarroch Castle was completed. Joan Dunsmuir moved in with 4 of her adult children, James, Alexander, Jesse, and Emily. The family occupied the enormous residence surrounded by servants, wealth, and the ghost of Robert Dunsmuir's ambition. But here's what nobody tells you about Joan Dunsmuir. She was absolutely ruthless about money. Robert's will left her the castle, a substantial cash inheritance estimated at $500,000, that's $15 million today, and income from several business holdings. But it didn't leave her the coal empire. That went to the sons. And Joan fought them for it, for years. She contested the will. She demanded a larger share. She argued that she was entitled to more of the Dunsmuir fortune because she had sacrificed everything for Robert's success. The legal battles went on for 5 years, draining family resources and creating rifts that would never heal. But wait, it gets worse, much worse, because the sons were destroying the empire from the inside. Robert Dunsmuir's oldest son, James, inherited control of the Wellington Colliery and the family's mining operations. James was, by all accounts, a disaster. He had none of his father's business sense and all of his father's arrogance. Within 3 years of Robert's death, the Wellington Colliery was hemorrhaging money. Labor strikes, equipment failures, mismanagement at every level. In 1901, James sold the Wellington Colliery for $1.5 million to a syndicate of investors. That's $48 million in today's money. Sounds good, right? Except the colliery was worth at least $5 million at the time of sale. James sold the family's primary asset for 30% of its actual value. The Dunsmuir coal empire, which had taken Robert 40 years to build, was gone in 12. And here's the kicker. Joan Dunsmuir didn't get a cent from that sale. The money went to James and the other sons. Joan, living in Craigdarroch Castle, watched her family's fortune evaporate while she sat in a mansion she couldn't afford to maintain. The castle required a staff of 12 servants just to keep it operational. Groundskeepers, housekeepers, cooks, maintenance workers. The annual operating cost was approximately $30,000 in 1900 currency, which is $1.1 million today. Joan's income couldn't support it. The castle was eating through her inheritance like fire through paper. By 1905, Joan Dunsmuir was 74 years old and living in a castle that was slowly falling apart around her. The servants were reduced to 6. Rooms were closed off to save on heating costs. The gardens, which had once required 2 full-time gardeners, grew wild and overgrown. And then Joan started seeing things. Or at least, that's what the servants reported. Joan claimed she heard footsteps on the grand staircase when nobody was there. She told her daughter Emily that she sometimes saw Robert standing in the doorway of his former study, watching her. She refused to go into certain rooms, saying they felt wrong or cold, even in summer. The servants whispered that Mrs. Dunsmuir was losing her mind. But other people in the house reported the same things. Footsteps, shadows, doors opening by themselves, the sound of someone walking in the tower when everyone was accounted for downstairs. On March 21, 1908, Joan Dunsmuir died in Craigdarroch Castle. She was 77 years old. The cause of death was recorded as old age, but family letters suggest she had been in declining mental health for years. Her estate was valued at just $75,000, a fraction of what she had inherited from Robert. Most of the fortune was gone. And here's what happened next. The family abandoned the castle. Immediately, Joan's children wanted nothing to do with Craigdarroch. The memories were too painful. The operating costs were too high. The building itself felt cursed. In 1908, the Dunsmuir family put Craigdarroch Castle up for sale. The asking price was $85,000, which is $2.6 million today. That's 94% less than what it cost to build just 20 years earlier. Nobody bought it. Who wants to buy a 39-room castle in Victoria, British Columbia, with a heating bill that could bankrupt a small town? For 3 years, Craigdarroch Castle sat empty. Completely empty. The furniture was removed, the artwork was sold, the stained glass windows, those $2.6 million masterpieces, stayed in place because they couldn't be removed without destroying them. Everything else was stripped out and auctioned off, and that's when people started reporting the really strange phenomena. Night watchmen hired to protect the empty building reported hearing piano music coming from the music room. Except there was no piano. It had been sold. Neighbors claimed they saw lights moving from room to room, as though someone was carrying a candle through the castle. The police investigated multiple times and found nothing. In 1911, a group of Victoria businessmen purchased Craigdarroch Castle for $55,000, that's $1.7 million today, and converted it into a military hospital. This was 3 years before World War I started, but Canada was already preparing for potential conflicts. When war broke out in 1914, Craigdarroch Castle became a convalescent hospital for wounded soldiers returning from the Western Front. Between 1915 and 1918, over 1,200 soldiers passed through Craigdarroch. Men with missing limbs, men with shell shock, men with gas damage to their lungs, men dying slowly from infections that 1915 medicine couldn't treat. The grand staircase, built as a symbol of wealth and power, became a place where men on crutches struggled to reach the upper floors. The music room, designed for chamber orchestras and elegant gatherings, became a surgery ward. The bedrooms where the Dunsmuir children had slept became recovery rooms, filled with rows of metal beds and the smell of antiseptic and death. And the ghosts multiplied. Hospital staff reported seeing figures in military uniforms walking the corridors at night. Nurses claimed they heard men screaming in empty rooms. One documented account from 1916 describes a nurse entering a third-floor bedroom and seeing a soldier sitting on a bed, staring out the window. When she approached to check on him, he vanished. The bed was empty. There was no soldier assigned to that room. But here's what's really disturbing: the death records. Between 1915 and 1918, at least 47 soldiers died at Craigdarroch Castle. 47. Their bodies were removed and buried, but their presence remained. Staff members refused to work night shifts. There were reports of medical instruments moving on their own. Beds that had been carefully made would be found rumpled, as though someone had been lying in them. The most frequently reported phenomenon was footsteps on the grand staircase. Multiple witnesses, including doctors and senior nursing staff, reported hearing the sound of boots marching up the wooden stairs. The footsteps would start at the ground floor, climb to the first landing, continue to the second floor, and then stop abruptly. When people investigated, the staircase was always empty. In 1918, the war ended, and Craigdarroch Castle's time as a military hospital ended with it. The building was cleared out, scrubbed down, and once again put up for sale. And once again, nobody wanted it. A castle full of ghost stories and bad memories doesn't attract many buyers. In 1919, Victoria College purchased Craigdarroch Castle for $75,000, approximately $1.2 million today, and converted it into an educational facility. Students attended classes in rooms where wounded soldiers had died. Professors lectured in spaces where the Dunsmuir family had hosted lavish parties and where Joan Dunsmuir had slowly lost her mind. The college years should have brought new energy to Craigdarroch, young people, learning, growth. But instead, the paranormal activity intensified. Students reported seeing a woman in a long white dress standing at the top of the grand staircase. She would appear for several seconds, sometimes seeming to look directly at whoever spotted her, and then fade away. Professors working late in their offices reported hearing children laughing and running in the hallways above them. When they went to investigate, the upper floors were empty and locked. One professor, Dr. Edmund Richardson, documented his experiences in a personal diary that's now held in the Victoria Archives. He wrote about hearing piano music, seeing shadows move across walls when no one was there to cast them, and feeling sudden, intense cold spots in certain rooms even during summer. But here's the part that nobody talks about. The female students refused to use the third-floor bathrooms after dark. There were multiple reports of a young girl appearing in the bathroom mirrors. Students would be washing their hands or fixing their hair, and they'd see a child's face appear in the mirror behind them. When they turned around, nothing was there. This happened so frequently that by 1925, the college installed additional lighting and mandated that students travel in pairs to the upper floors after sunset. Victoria College occupied Craigdarroch Castle until 1946. That's 27 years. And in those 27 years, hundreds of students and faculty members reported paranormal experiences. The administration never officially acknowledged these reports, but they documented them. Incident reports, witness statements, maintenance records describing unexplained damage or mysterious malfunctions. In 1946, Victoria College moved to a new campus. Craigdarroch Castle was once again abandoned, empty, waiting. Between 1946 and 1959, Craigdarroch Castle served multiple purposes. It was briefly a music conservatory, which led to one of the most famous paranormal accounts in the building's history. Music students practicing on the second floor reported hearing a phantom piano playing along with them. The melody was always the same, a classical piece that nobody could identify. When they stopped playing, the phantom piano would continue for several seconds before fading out. One music teacher, Margaret Sutherland, recorded her experiences in a letter to the Victoria Daily Colonist in 1951. She wrote, "I have heard the phantom piano myself on 3 separate occasions. It is not imagination. It is not acoustics. It is a real sound, a real melody, coming from a source that does not physically exist in this building. I cannot explain it, but I can confirm it is real." From 1952 to 1959, the castle served as government offices. Civil servants worked in rooms that had once been bedrooms, parlors, and reception halls. And the reports continued. Filing cabinets would be found open in the morning when they had been locked the night before. Papers would move from one desk to another. Typewriters would turn on by themselves. The most disturbing account from this period comes from a night janitor named William Harcourt. In 1957, Harcourt was cleaning the ground floor when he heard footsteps on the grand staircase. He assumed it was another employee working late, so he called out a greeting. The footsteps continued, growing louder, descending the stairs. Harcourt walked to the base of the staircase and looked up. He could hear the footsteps clearly, the distinct sound of leather shoes on wooden stairs, but he couldn't see anyone. The footsteps descended to within 10 feet of where he stood, and then stopped. Harcourt quit the next day and refused to ever enter the building again. By 1959, Craigdarroch Castle was in serious danger. The building had been neglected for decades. The roof leaked. The woodwork was rotting. Many of the stained glass windows were damaged. The structure needed millions in restoration work, and nobody wanted to pay for it. The provincial government considered demolishing the castle and selling the land for development. But a group of local citizens formed the Craigdarroch Castle Historical Museum Society and raised $20,000 to purchase the property. That's $195,000 in today's money. They saved the castle from destruction. Between 1959 and 1979, the society worked to restore Craigdarroch Castle to something approaching its original grandeur. They tracked down period-appropriate furniture, They repaired the stained glass, they refinished the woodwork, they stabilized the structure and made it safe for public tours. The castle opened as a museum in 1979, and that's when the modern paranormal accounts began to pile up. Because now Craigdarroch wasn't just home to maintenance workers and janitors, it was visited by thousands of tourists every year, and many of them saw things they couldn't explain. The most common report is the woman in white. Dozens of visitors have reported seeing a woman in a long cream-colored Victorian dress standing on the grand staircase or appearing in the windows of the upper floors. The descriptions are remarkably consistent. She's middle-aged. She has dark hair pulled back in a bun. She wears a high-necked dress with lace at the collar. And she looks sad. Many people believe this is Joan Dunsmuir. Her portraits hang in the castle, and the woman in white matches Joan's appearance at around age 60. Some witnesses claim the apparition looks directly at them before fading away. Others say she seems unaware of their presence, as though she's trapped in her own moment of time. But the woman in white isn't the only spirit reportedly haunting Craigdarroch. There's the child. Multiple visitors have reported hearing a young girl laughing, crying, or calling out in the upper hallways. Some have seen a small figure in a white nightgown running between rooms. The child always disappears when approached. Researchers have tried to identify who this might be. The Dunsmuirs had 10 children, and several died young. Mary Jean Dunsmuir died in 1871 at age 9. Elizabeth Hamilton Dunsmuir died in 1882 at age 16. Could one of them still be present in the castle? Nobody knows for certain. Then there are the soldiers. Multiple tour guides have reported seeing men in military uniforms standing in doorways or sitting on benches in the halls. These figures are always motionless, always silent, and they vanish when directly approached. One particularly disturbing account comes from 2003. A security guard doing his nightly rounds encountered a man in a World War I uniform standing at the top of the grand staircase. The guard assumed it was an actor or historical reenactor who had somehow remained in the building after closing. He called out, asking the man to identify himself. The figure turned and began walking down the stairs toward him. As it descended, the guard realized he could see through the figure. He could see the wall behind it. He could see the balusters of the staircase railing through its body. The guard ran. He left the building and refused to complete his rounds that night. His report was filed with the Museum Society, and it's now part of Craigdarroch's official documentation of paranormal activity. But the single most famous paranormal event at Craigdarroch Castle is the incident of the walking trousers. In 1994, 2 museum staff members were preparing the castle for a private event when they both witnessed a pair of men's trousers, dark Victorian-style trousers with a stripe down the leg, walking down the grand staircase, not floating, walking, moving with the gait of a person wearing them. But there was no person, just the trousers, moving as though invisible legs filled them. The trousers descended about 15 stairs and then vanished mid-step. Both witnesses gave identical descriptions of what they saw. The Museum Society documented the incident, and it's been featured in multiple paranormal investigation shows and documentaries. Here's the kicker. The trousers match those worn in portraits of Robert Dunsmuir. Dark fabric, vertical stripe, Victorian cut. Was it Robert Dunsmuir descending a staircase, forever arriving home to a castle he never lived in? Beyond the visible apparitions, Craigdarroch Castle is famous for its environmental phenomena. The cold spots are documented and consistent. Certain locations in the building experience sudden dramatic temperature drops that cannot be explained by drafts, air conditioning, or other natural causes. The most intense cold spot is located on the second-floor landing, approximately halfway up the grand staircase. Visitors frequently report a sensation of walking through an invisible barrier of freezing air. Temperature readings taken with digital thermometers show drops of 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit in this specific location, even though the surrounding areas maintain normal temperatures. Another cold spot exists in what was Robert Dunsmuir's study. The room is consistently colder than the rest of the building, and visitors report feeling a sense of intense sadness or pressure when they enter. Some people refuse to go into the study, saying it feels wrong or heavy, even though they can't articulate why. Shadow figures are another common report. These are human-shaped shadows that move across walls, through doorways, or along corridors without any visible source casting them. Security camera footage has captured several instances of shadow figures moving through rooms when the castle is closed and empty. In 2011, a security camera in the third-floor hallway recorded a dark, human-shaped shadow crossing from one bedroom to another over the course of 3 seconds. There was no motion sensor trigger, no doors opened, no explanation for the shadow's presence. The footage has been analyzed by multiple paranormal research groups, and none have been able to explain it as a technical malfunction or natural phenomenon. Now, here's the part nobody's discussing. Craigdarroch Castle isn't just a haunted house with some ghost stories. It's a case study in how trauma, grief, death, and human suffering can imprint themselves on a location. And there are specific reasons why this information doesn't get the attention it deserves. Reason 1. The tourism industry doesn't want you thinking too hard about what haunting actually means. Craigdarroch Castle attracts over 150,000 visitors per year. That's $1.5 million in annual ticket revenue. The gift shop, the events, the weddings held at the castle, these generate additional income. The Museum Society depends on this revenue to maintain the building. If people started understanding that the paranormal activity at Craigdarroch might be evidence of genuine psychological imprints, actual residual trauma manifesting as observable phenomena, it becomes less entertaining and more disturbing. Tourists want ghost stories. They don't want to confront the reality that they're walking through a building where real people suffered, grieved, and died in ways that left permanent marks on the physical space. Reason 2. Academic historians dismiss paranormal accounts because acknowledging them would require accepting that consciousness or emotional energy might persist beyond death in ways that current scientific frameworks can't explain. The historical community has extensively documented the Dunsmuir family history, the coal mining industry, the castle's construction, and its various institutional uses. But you won't find serious academic papers discussing the paranormal phenomena, even though the documentation is as thorough as any other historical record. Why? Because it challenges materialist assumptions about reality. If ghosts are real, if places can retain emotional imprints, if consciousness isn't entirely contained within individual human lifespans, then entire fields of study need to reconsider their foundational assumptions. Reason 3. The Dunsmuir family legacy is deeply uncomfortable for Canadian history. Robert Dunsmuir built his fortune on the backs of miners who died in his pits. At least 150 documented deaths, possibly many more. His business practices would be considered criminal by modern labor standards. He paid poverty wages, enforced brutal working conditions, and crushed any attempt at unionization. But he's remembered as a successful businessman and industrial pioneer. The haunting of Craigdarroch Castle is a physical reminder that exploitation has consequences. The ghosts, if that's what they are, represent the unresolved moral weight of how that fortune was built. Nobody wants to discuss that. Reason 4. The military hospital period represents national trauma that Canada hasn't fully processed. Between 1915 and 1918, Craigdarroch Castle was where broken soldiers were hidden away from public view. Men with missing limbs, men screaming from shell shock, men dying slowly from gas damage and infected wounds. These soldiers were heroes when they shipped overseas. When they came back damaged, they were an embarrassment. Craigdarroch was part of the system that kept those realities out of sight. The ghosts of soldiers, seen by dozens of witnesses over decades, are evidence that this trauma never went away. It just got buried under newer narratives about wartime glory and sacrifice. Reason 5. Modern psychology can't explain why multiple unconnected witnesses report identical phenomena. This is the real problem that nobody wants to address. If one person sees a woman in white on the staircase, that's a hallucination. If 50 people over 30 years report seeing the same woman in the same location, wearing the same dress with the same sad expression, that's data. Mass hallucination doesn't work as an explanation because the witnesses aren't experiencing the phenomena simultaneously. They're separated by years, sometimes decades. They have no contact with each other. They don't read previous reports before visiting. Yet their descriptions match in specific detail. This suggests something is present in the castle that causes consistent perceptual experiences across different observers. Science doesn't have a framework for that yet. Reason 6. The walking trousers incident specifically contradicts every materialist explanation for hauntings. Residual hauntings are supposedly like recordings, impressions of past events that replay under certain conditions. Intelligent hauntings are supposedly consciousness or personality persisting after death. But the walking trousers don't fit either category. It's a partial manifestation, just clothing, moving with purpose, no visible wearer, no accompanying figure, no logical reason for this specific thing to appear in this specific way. It's absurd, which makes people uncomfortable, so it gets dismissed or turned into a joke. But both witnesses gave identical accounts. The museum documented it. This happened, and nobody can explain why. Reason 7. If Craigdarroch Castle is genuinely haunted, then thousands of other buildings probably are too. This is the implication that really scares people. If a century of grief, death, and trauma can imprint itself on one location strongly enough to create observable phenomena, then what about hospitals? What about prisons? What about battlefields? What about any place where intense human suffering occurred? If haunting is real and widespread, then we're living in a world saturated with unresolved trauma made manifest. That's terrifying. So it's easier to treat Craigdarroch as an isolated curiosity, a quirky tourist attraction with some ghost stories, rather than evidence of something larger and more disturbing about the nature of consciousness, memory, and place. Over the past 30 years, Craigdarroch Castle has been investigated by dozens of paranormal research teams. Equipment readings have documented electromagnetic field anomalies in specific locations. Audio recordings have captured unexplained voices and sounds. Video footage has shown movement and shadow figures when the building was empty and locked. One of the most comprehensive investigations was conducted in 2008 by the British Columbia Paranormal Research Society. They spent 72 hours in the castle using electromagnetic field meters, digital thermometers, audio recorders, and infrared cameras. Their findings were striking. They documented 17 separate electromagnetic field spikes in locations corresponding to reported paranormal activity. The second-floor landing, Robert Dunsmuir's study, the third-floor hallway, and the music room all showed EMF readings significantly higher than baseline when no electrical sources were present to account for them. They captured audio of footsteps on the grand staircase during a period when all investigators were accounted for and stationary. The footsteps were clear, distinct, and matched the pattern of someone descending wooden stairs. No natural explanation was found. Most significantly, 3 different investigators reported seeing a woman in Victorian dress standing in the tower window during the second night of investigation. They described her independently, without communicating with each other first. All 3 descriptions matched. Middle-aged woman, dark hair, cream-colored dress, looking out the window with a sad expression. When they reviewed their footage later, infrared cameras had captured a thermal anomaly in the exact location where the witnesses reported seeing the woman. A human-shaped area of slightly elevated temperature, approximately 5 feet 4 inches tall, present for approximately 12 seconds before dissipating. Paranormal researchers have proposed several theories to explain the phenomena at Craigdarroch Castle. The most widely accepted is the stone tape theory, which suggests that traumatic or emotionally intense events can somehow be recorded in the physical materials of a building, particularly stone, wood, and crystal, which includes the quartz in granite. The theory proposes that these materials can store and later release information in ways similar to how magnetic tape stores audio or video. Under certain conditions, perhaps specific electromagnetic frequencies or the presence of individuals with particular sensitivities, these recordings can replay, creating the impression of ghosts or hauntings. Craigdarroch Castle is constructed from sandstone, granite, and extensive woodwork. It's filled with quartz crystal in the granite foundation. If the stone tape theory has any validity, Craigdarroch would be an ideal structure for retaining emotional and psychological imprints. But here's the problem with that theory. It doesn't explain intelligent responses. It doesn't explain figures that appear to react to living observers. It doesn't explain phenomena that seem purposeful or directed, like the walking trousers or the woman in white who reportedly makes eye contact with witnesses. An alternative theory focuses on consciousness persistence. This suggests that some aspect of human consciousness, personality, or awareness can exist independently of the physical brain and body. Under this model, the apparitions at Craigdarroch aren't recordings, they're actual entities, possibly Joan Dunsmuir, Robert Dunsmuir, unnamed soldiers, or the Dunsmuir children, existing in some form that occasionally becomes perceptible to living observers. The problem with this theory is that it requires accepting premises that contradict materialist scientific understanding of consciousness. If awareness can persist without a physical brain, then every assumption about the relationship between mind and matter needs to be reconsidered. A third theory suggests that the paranormal phenomena are psychological projections. Visitors to Craigdarroch Castle know its history. They know it's supposedly haunted. They enter with expectations, and those expectations shape their perceptions, creating experiences that feel real but originate entirely within their own minds. This theory falls apart under scrutiny. Multiple witnesses reporting identical phenomena they had no knowledge of before visiting. Security guards and staff who work in the building regularly and initially had no belief in paranormal activity. Children who report seeing things before being told the castle is haunted. Mass psychological projection doesn't explain consistency of detail across decades of independent witnesses. The honest answer is that nobody knows what's happening at Craigdarroch Castle. The phenomena are real. The documentation is extensive. The explanations are insufficient. But let's talk about what happened to the rest of the Dunsmuir family, because the tragedy of Craigdarroch Castle extends far beyond the building itself. The Dunsmuir fortune didn't just disappear. It was destroyed, systematically, by the family itself. James Dunsmuir, who sold the coal empire, went on to become Premier of British Columbia and later Lieutenant Governor. Sounds impressive, except James was spectacularly corrupt. His government was accused of accepting bribes, manipulating elections, and selling political favors. He resigned in disgrace in 1902. James built his own castle, Hatley Castle, which cost $4 million in 1908 dollars. That's $120 million today. $4 million for a house. James died in 1920, and his estate was bankrupt. The castle was sold. The Dunsmuir fortune he'd inherited was gone. Alexander Dunsmuir, Joan's second son, received a substantial inheritance when Joan died. He used it to build Dunsmuir Lodge in Oakland, California. Alexander was an alcoholic and died in 1900 at age 46 from complications related to drinking. His estate was tied up in legal battles for years. Jessie Dunsmuir married but had no children. She died in 1931, having gone through most of her inheritance funding a lifestyle she couldn't afford. Emily Dunsmuir never married. She lived in various properties across British Columbia, burning through her inheritance on failed investments. She died in 1944, nearly broke. Of Robert Dunsmuir's 10 children, not one successfully maintained or grew the fortune they inherited. Within 50 years of Robert's death, the Dunsmuir empire was completely dissolved. The coal mines sold, the railways sold, the real estate sold. The family that had once controlled 75% of Vancouver Island's economy was scattered, broke, and broken. People in Victoria started calling it the Dunsmuir curse. The idea that Robert Dunsmuir's brutal business practices and the suffering he'd caused had created a karmic weight that destroyed his descendants. Folklore, superstition. Except the facts support it. Every single member of the family who inherited substantial wealth lost it. Every single one. The paranormal activity at Craigdarroch Castle continues to this day. In 2019, a tour guide named Rebecca Morrison reported seeing the woman in white on 3 separate occasions over a 2-month period. Each time, the apparition appeared at the top of the grand staircase during early morning hours before the castle opened for tours. Each time, Morrison watched the figure for several seconds before it faded away. Morrison filed detailed reports with the Museum Society. She described the woman's clothing, her posture, her expression. Every detail matched descriptions given by previous witnesses, dating back decades. Morrison had no prior knowledge of these earlier reports. In 2021, during a private nighttime photography session, a professional photographer captured an image that has since become one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for paranormal activity at Craigdarroch. The photograph shows the second-floor landing and part of the grand staircase. In the image, there's a translucent female figure standing at the top of the stairs. The figure is partially transparent, the wall visible through her torso, but her features are distinct. Middle-aged woman, Victorian dress, dark hair. The photographer, Michael Chen, submitted the image to multiple experts for analysis. None found evidence of digital manipulation. The metadata confirmed the image was taken with a standard camera under low-light conditions with no flash. The figure appears to be a genuine photographic anomaly. But here's what really matters. Craigdarroch Castle receives reports of paranormal activity almost weekly. Visitors see things, feel things, hear things. The museum staff has stopped being surprised by these reports. They've started documenting them systematically, building a database of witness accounts that now contains over 400 separate incidents spanning 40 years. That's not folklore. That's not legend. That's data. And it points to something genuinely anomalous happening inside Craigdarroch Castle. So why does this matter? Why should you care about a haunted castle in Victoria, British Columbia? Because Craigdarroch Castle is proof that actions have consequences that extend beyond individual lifetimes. Robert Dunsmuir built his fortune on exploitation and death. He paid poverty wages. He ignored safety regulations. He let 150 men die in his mines so he could increase his profit margins. He built a monument to his own ego with blood money, and he never got to enjoy it. He died before walking through the front door. Joan Dunsmuir inherited a castle she couldn't afford and a fortune that evaporated. She spent her final years watching her family disintegrate and possibly watching ghosts that nobody else could see. She died surrounded by luxury in a building that was bankrupting her. The soldiers who convalesced at Craigdarroch came home from war broken and discarded. They were hidden in a castle on a hill so polite society wouldn't have to see what war actually does to human beings. 47 of them died there, and now visitors report seeing them, forever trapped in the place where they suffered. The Dunsmuir children inherited wealth they didn't earn and couldn't maintain. They burned through millions. They destroyed the empire their father built. None of them escaped the weight of where that money came from. This is the lesson of Craigdarroch Castle. You can build monuments. You can accumulate wealth. You can create impressive legacies. But if those things are built on suffering, on exploitation, on the broken bodies of people you used and discarded, those foundations are poison. The rot spreads. The curse, if you want to call it that, isn't supernatural. It's cause and effect operating on scales longer than individual human lives. The ghosts at Craigdarroch Castle, if they exist, aren't decoration. They're not there to entertain tourists or sell tickets. They're evidence. Physical, observable evidence that certain kinds of human experience leave permanent marks on the world. Grief leaves marks. Suffering leaves marks. Death leaves marks. And when those experiences are concentrated in a single location over decades, those marks become perceptible. Some people see them as apparitions. Some people feel them as cold spots or oppressive atmospheres. Some people hear them as phantom footsteps or music from empty rooms. But they're all encountering the same thing, the accumulated weight of human pain that has somehow imprinted itself on a physical structure. The castle isn't haunted because it's old. Lots of old buildings aren't haunted. The castle is haunted because of what happened inside it, specifically, intentionally. A family destroyed by its own greed. Soldiers abandoned by their country. Children who died young. A widow who slowly lost her mind in rooms too large and too expensive for anyone to maintain. Every report of paranormal activity at Craigdarroch Castle is a reminder that these things happened. The ghosts won't let you forget. The woman in white appears on the staircase, And you have to remember Joan Dunsmuir dying alone in an unsustainable monument to her dead husband's ego. The soldiers materialize in doorways, and you have to remember that 47 men died there while their country celebrated victory overseas. The child runs through empty hallways, and you have to remember that children of the wealthy die just like anyone else, and all the money in the world can't prevent grief. This is why Craigdarroch Castle matters. It's not a ghost story. It's a historical record written in phenomena that science doesn't fully understand yet. It's a monument to the simple truth that you cannot escape the consequences of your choices, even by dying. Especially by dying. Robert Dunsmuir spent $45 million in today's money building a castle to prove he'd succeeded. He never walked through the front door. Joan Dunsmuir inherited that castle and spent 20 years watching her fortune and her family disintegrate around her. The soldiers who recovered there were rewarded for their service with beds in a mansion and early graves. The Dunsmuir children burned through one of Canada's largest fortunes in a single generation. And 135 years later, people walk through Craigdarroch Castle and encounter something. Call it ghosts, call it residual energy, call it emotional imprinting, call it whatever you want. But hundreds of witnesses have seen, heard, or felt things in that building that they cannot explain through natural means. The stained glass windows still stand. They're worth $2.6 million in today's currency. The oak staircase still rises 87 steps from the ground floor to the tower. The 17 fireplaces still line the walls, each one custom designed and imported from Europe. The castle still dominates the hill overlooking Victoria. But it's not a monument to success. It's a monument to failure, to the costs of greed, to the weight of suffering, to the permanence of consequence. And nobody's talking about this because it's uncomfortable, because it suggests that the moral weight of our choices doesn't disappear when we die. Because it implies that exploitation and suffering leave marks that persist. Because if Craigdarroch Castle is haunted, truly haunted, then consciousness might not work the way we've been told it works. Reality might be stranger and more terrible than materialist philosophy allows. Display destroys wealth, vanity destroys legacies, and suffering creates ghosts that last longer than any fortune ever could. The final count: $45 million to build the castle. $15 million inherited by Joan, all of it gone within 50 years. A family empire controlling 75% of an island's economy dissolved in 2 generations. 150 miners dead, 47 soldiers dead, and a building where, to this day, people see figures that shouldn't exist, hear sounds that have no source, and feel the presence of something that refuses to be forgotten. That's the dark story of Craigdarroch Castle. And if you think it's just history, just ghost stories, just entertainment, then you haven't been paying attention. Next time, I'll show you what happened to another Gilded Age fortune, the Vanderbilts, and why their story ended even worse. Subscribe so you don't miss it.